That was a lovely introduction. Thank you, Tom. It's a total honor to be invited to speak with you. You know, Tom was the headmaster of one of the great private independent schools in America, Harvard Westlake. And my wife and I have had the privilege of sending some kids to some private high schools. And one of the things you hope for, of course, is a fine education. But you particularly hope that when the moment comes, the school will provide an unduly positive recommendation in favor of your child. Listening to that introduction, I have to say, every kid at Harvard Westlake probably got into a college above what they deserved. This guy knows how to do an intro, so thank you for that. You're very kind. It's also a particular honor to get to speak with you this evening in the final year of Arthur Levine. Where are you, Arthur?
Here I am.
Arthur Levine's leadership of this organization.
The fact that I'm leaving.
I am, and it's a sign of the apocalypse that I'm thinking. You know, it's been an honor and a pleasure to get to know you over the last few years as I've learned something about this space. I am going to try to be slightly humorous in my speech, which I figure is probably par for the course of the Woodrow Wilson. I think that's got to be the moray, is a little humor at your events. I want to also congratulate you at this foundation. I had a chance to talk to some of you who are on the board and involved, as well as some of the people involved. It's pretty extraordinary what's getting accomplished at this academy. And I want to dwell on that briefly, but I mean, it's really something I think to be very proud of as an operating foundation, the birthing and even the willingness to send, you know, this new institution into its future as an independent institution as well. You know, I think it should not go without mention how extraordinary it is. I should also mention, as an aside, that as the chair of the Board of Higher Education, I had the privilege of calling for the vote to approve you. And so I will have to leave $22.47 or whatever it is I owe you, because of course I don't want to be overly influenced by the excellent meal. I don't want anyone claiming conflicts of interest here. I've also had the privilege of serving in a fellowship that the foundation's put together for teams from 4 different states working on leadership around higher ed in different places. It's been really fascinating to work with people from really very different places, from Georgia, from Indiana, from New Jersey, as well as the team from Massachusetts. It's been very eye-opening for me and a real pleasure for me. So, now, one last thing I have to say about Arthur is, you know, this is a man of many careers. Some of you may know that some years ago, Arthur was walking along the beach, and he found one of those bottles like you see in the cartoon, and he thought, why not? So he rubbed his hands against it. This was before his most recent job, and out came the genie. And the genie said, you get one wish, you know the drill, come on, you've seen this before. So Arthur said, well, I'm thinking of getting out of my current field and doing something quite different. I'd like to be, you know, maybe Secretary of State. I think I'm ambassadorial, I think I could lead, but I need an accomplishment in that sphere, otherwise I won't get a job. Here's what I want you to do. I want you to help me figure out this Israeli-Palestinian problem. And the genie said, well, I've been in this bottle for a while, can you fill me in? So Arthur explains the history of problems in the Middle East going back thousands of years. I don't have to fill you all in the details of how problematic this is. And he took out a map, which he happened to have with him, and explained the problems of settlements in Jerusalem and the Gaza. And at the end of which the genie said, you know, in thousands of years in this bottle, I have never had to say this before, but I can't do this wish. I can't deliver it. This is too hard. Do you have anything else? So Arthur said, well, if I can't get out of education, then I have this idea that we should reinvent how we train teachers, because teachers have really been taught the wrong way. I ran a teachers college. I'm regretful that we couldn't change it more, so I'm going to go to I was thinking maybe I could go to this foundation and come up with this approach. It'd be competency-based, and maybe I could talk to MIT into lending their brands and get involved with this thing. And instead of people taking courses, we would see if they could really know how to teach. And the genie said, can I see that map of the Middle East again? So my assigned topic for tonight, I told Tom a story about a joke at my son's commencement speech that didn't work at all, so I'm very relieved I still the joke I did. My topic for tonight is supposed to be about the intersection of higher education and K-12. And in my second career here in education, which is now 18 years in the making, I've been mostly working in K-12. My experience is relatively recent to higher ed. The governor had the wisdom or foolishness to ask me to be the chair of the Board of Higher Ed, which meant I had to learn what higher ed is. One thing I learned is that I can now call my friends, like my new friends like Anna and my longer standing friends in this room, you apparently are lower ed. Just in case you're wondering. But I've had to learn a lot about higher ed, and I still have a long way to go. One thing that has been really striking to me about this intersectionality between, a term very popular in the academy, intersectionality, between higher ed and K-12 is how little there really is. These are two shockingly separate silos. Obviously relevant in all of our lives in this room, obviously relevant to the success of the students and the communities and that we care about, and yet operating under essentially entirely different cultures, different operating systems, if I can use that term, different expectations, different norms, in a fashion that I think of as deeply problematic for our society, and more importantly, I think for the students who find themselves at that intersection. So I was glad to get a chance to talk about, what I see as some of the particular problems that happen at that intersection. When I think about those two silos, a different term that comes to my mind from my business career is, and this is a really kind of, boy, is this a sleepy term, but there's a term in business called supply chain management. Some of you may know that term or may know it well, right? And it's a simple idea that has been profoundly important in business, which is the notion that the relationships you have between yourself and the suppliers to you and to whom you supply is absolutely crucial to your business. And whereas once upon a time there were sloppy relationships between, say, GM and the people who made their parts, those relationships become intimate. And it's just as important to Apple what happens, or better yet, to, let's say, to Google what happens in the manufacturers of new chips, as it is to the new chip manufacturers, what is it that is needed in the next generation of telephony. That should be the relationship between higher ed and K-12, but it isn't even vaguely that. And that is a very big problem. There are two incredibly obvious connections. I mean, it's almost embarrassing to name them in terms of their obviousness, but everybody in higher ed, and particularly, essentially, truly everyone in public higher ed, comes from the high schools down the road. So, I mean, K-12 is feeding the very students who show up there, and higher ed has that next opportunity with them, and of course the inverse is true as well. Virtually every teacher teaching in any K-12 system was trained by a teacher's college relatively nearby. There are some number of teachers who weren't trained in a teacher's college, they may have gone to a different college, but higher ed is generally preparing the entire workforce of K-12. You couldn't imagine a more intimate set of logical relationships than the people you're producing your kids to go to those schools, and they're producing the teachers you hire. So you would assume these two groups must know each other well, must work all the time super closely, and that's why we have this fabulously optimized American education system that we have. But it's not the case. If I start with K-12, and it's been fun to catch up with some great superintendents who are here, and part of why I admire what's going on at the academy is that you have the actual interaction that you need. They're here tonight, they're enthusiastic. I had a chance to talk to Eric Conti, who's been the head of the Superintendent's Association, and to Anna Nolan, and to see them here tonight, and I know there's a leader from Somerville as well, and probably others. It speaks to the sincerity of the work. Even as you're inventing a new thing, you're working very closely with the people who are the right people to make the call as to whether this is really working for their schools. We've been stuck in K-12 for 25 years in a belief that we could do something called make students college and career ready. And I know that many of you are super expert in education policy, so I'm not going to bore you with the details, but the basic idea, right, was we were going to figure out, apparently we hadn't figured out before, that we ought to have students be college or career, but chiefly college, really, ready by the end of K-12. And in particular, among other things, we were going to develop standards of what they would have learned and assessments to show that. And yet, I could say in Massachusetts public higher ed, we have exactly the same percentage of students who go into remediation at our community colleges, which is most, not many, not some, most, the majority of our students go into remediation when they arrive at a community college. Which, if any of you don't know what that means, it means that they take a class that they do not get credit for, but they have to pay for, in order to perhaps attain the level of capability in math or English, particularly math, such that they could take a college entry course at the community college. So clearly we're nowhere near ready, and you won't be shocked to hear that of the thousands of students, it's about 12,000 a year in recent years in Massachusetts, who enter those remediation programs. Very few, well under 10% will ever get any degree. So it's a trap, it's a dead end for them, right? So we're not doing very well on that. I personally think one of the obvious problems is we've assumed that a single test is the measure of whether a student has or has not gotten college skills. I'm a big supporter of test-based accountability, but I do not believe this idea that there's a single test that can adequately convey to you whether a student is college ready. Neither do colleges think that. Colleges that have the luxury of looking at a lot of students applying look at a lot more than just test scores in their determination. And as a simple example of that, we've spent years and years and years developing our MCAS 2.0 because we weren't going to go with PARCC because we were in Massachusetts and will be exceptional as our state test. But our higher ed system says we don't know about that. We're going to give these kids AccuPlacer. AccuPlacer is a standard test used around the country to determine, by the college point of view, whether kids are ready. When I first learned that, I truly thought I couldn't understand. I'm from outside of education, that's my starting point. I thought I must misunderstand this. It can't be true that you say that after all this work, because those of you in K-12 know, right? We're super focused on the higher MCAS scores. The idea that the college said, that's nice, but here's the AccuPlacer test. And we will decide whether or not on this test basis you can proceed. So we have made shockingly little progress, I believe, on not just raising kids' skills such that they don't need it, but even agreeing on what is the standard. I think the same thing can be said of teacher prep. Higher ed, drives these students, but widely you hear dissatisfaction from superintendents. And I quizzed a couple of the superintendents that I had a chance to chat with tonight, and I thought was interesting what they said, which is that students are coming somewhat better prepared from the standard preparatory programs, but also the expectations of what's going to get achieved in schools has grown, and the complexity of the lives of students has grown. So we're not really narrowing the gap in teacher readiness from our standard teachers, preparatory institutions, to what K-12 systems need. And I'm involved in leading some K-12 efforts, and I can say we don't look to the school down the road and say, thank God they're preparing students who will come and solve our problems immediately. So on the teacher prep side, we also have this shockingly large gap. It's even as simple as our teacher preparatory programs produce vastly more elementary school teachers than we need, and vastly fewer high school STEM teachers than we need. Again, this won't surprise you with the academy, but talk about really bad supply chain management when the source of the most important product you have, because surely teachers are the most important thing any public school system has, produce 10 times too many rear wheels and half the number of front wheels that you need. You would think there'd be a conversation and we'd say, this isn't good for those teachers, this isn't good for our schools, we got to change this. And yet somehow we don't have that capacity. So I've been super negative about the challenges because honestly they shock me as a policymaker new to this, and I think they should shock more of us. And I think part of the reason we often don't talk about this is because you're usually speaking at a higher ed dinner or a higher ed event, and there's a bunch of higher ed concerns, or you're speaking at a K-12 event, there's a bunch of K-12 concerns, but this question of that intersection, is too rarely there. I think there are some incredible opportunities to change that, and I want to talk about two of those, and then close maybe on a glass half full, glass half empty note. On the things that I think are really shaping things, I think there are two trends that are just emerging, and I think at the Academy you capture one of them brilliantly, maybe both of them. One of them is a move from institution-centered thinking to student-centered thinking. It is a cliche in education to say we're student-centered. The reality is almost everyone's institution-centered. I mean, intellectually, honestly, if you're running a college, you're focused on the challenges of institution. If you're running a K-12 system or a high school, you're focused on that institution. That is the exigencies of our current system. You are not focused on the question of where's the student in their progression and how to think about it from their perspective independently. I'm not saying you don't care. I'm not saying you don't make efforts. I'm just saying I think if you talk to most people running K-12 systems or high schools, they will tell you about all kinds of problems with the union, with the school board, other issues that are kind of have to do with high school. And if you talk to college people, they'll talk to you about Pell Grants and, lawsuits in federal court about affirmative action against Harvard or whatever that have to do with their institution. But when you say, well, where's the student in all of this? The student is kind of somebody passed casually, really, frankly, from one system to the other. But I think we're learning to be more student-centered in both environments. And one of the reforms that I'm particularly focused on as chair of the Board of Higher Ed is early college. And if you don't know what early college is, I encourage you to get to know it. It's a really cool approach aimed at saying students in high school are ready to be high school students, but they're often ready to be college students. Most of the people in this room themselves or their kids took AP, which claims to be a college level course in high school of limited potential value in actually turning into, for example, a reduced cost of college, but still alleged to be college work. Poor kids have almost no access to any head start on college, so to say. And yet the other day, the governor and I were in a room following up on this policy that we've passed, where 300 kids in Chelsea High School, which is our probably second or third poorest district in the state, are taking community college courses in significant numbers. Most of the kids had at least a semester that they would get, and many of them a year, and some of them in a couple of years are going to have a full associate's degree on the day they graduate from high school. And let me tell you, these are students who are not, this is not about an honors program, this is about students who normally would never be thought of as college material. There was a poignant moment when one of the students turned to the governor and told him how in Spanish and his family, they used the expression, he was thanking the governor for this program, including particularly how much money he saves, right? Because this is all paid for in the high school phase by high school money. Zero college cost for those credits, right? He said, in my family, we have this saying in Spanish, tighten your stomach, which means apparently, essentially, we don't have enough food for our family today. This is what he was conveying to the governor mattered to him about the opportunity to reduce the cost of college. And it was an extraordinary moment of pride for me of what policy can make, but also a reminder, these students were ready to do college work. In the normal course, we would have bored them to death with standard high school material and then told them, take somewhat similar material as a college student just because it's convenient for colleges to charge you for the same material again. So I think early college is a really exciting example of focusing on where's the student, where are they ready? And if they're not ready, by the way, what do we do to make them ready? Now, how do we prepare them for a test? How do we get them ready to take the courses? The students conveyed so powerfully what it meant to them to prove to themselves they could actually take college courses, both at their high school and then at the college, in terms of their confidence that they could be college material. The other one I want to talk about, which is central to the Wilson Academy, is this competency-based idea. This is a really deeply powerful idea, and I had a wonderful chance talking to both Alex and Javi a bit, but Alex in greater depth, the 2-year students, about what's in this, and what does it mean to be thinking about the competencies. And I have to say, you two, if you were random people near me at the cocktail party, but if you two represent the program, I'm in. You are really impressive young people. But this idea of moving away from this tired notion that what matters is whether you served your time in classes, whether you got the credit hours, whether you went through that. When as an employer, and I am one, and I have been one throughout my career, my interest is far more to whether you have the skills. And like many employers, I don't know whether if you say you took accounting at such and such school, or if you took fill in the blank at such and such school, do you actually really know how to do those things? I don't know. So I'm much more interested in, I think most employers are in competencies than I am in course attendance and adequate enough performance. And I really appreciated Anna's enthusiasm for how these competencies are being evaluated by the Academy. And again, it made me really feel great about what you're doing at the Academy, that here's this, tough-minded superintendent who's not here to cheer on, the theory of the future. She's looking for good science teachers for Natick this year, right? Nice to hear you feel that, and exciting to hear you, Alex, talking about what does it mean to teach students in multiple modalities. And Javi, for you to talk about how would I, if I can't do what I could do at Natick High School with super cool 3D software in my classroom, how do I capture the essence of that learning moment, right? So this idea, though, that we would define competencies and free them from the context of where they're taught, by whom they're taught, how many credit hours they are, but whether you have them or not have them is incredibly scary to the education system we have, because it represents something so different that it's really difficult to know what it is. And I, again, commend all of you involved in this and trying to make it real in this particular program, and I urge all of us to lean hard into it if we want to see real change in the systems we have. So I'm going to close by my glass half empty, glass half full. On the glass half empty, I mean, we have some real challenges. K-12 education reform change is a very discouraged field. I was just at a big national conference on it, and it is impressive how across the nation people feel set back by what's happened in the last 25 years. Here in Massachusetts, the leader on NAEP scores, we've been flat for a decade. So we have not achieved a vision, no matter what our enthusiasm is, no matter what our belief is for what we set out to do. Higher ed, I've learned, makes K-12 look dynamic in its pace of change. And I'm just fascinated by the sociology of how K-12 folks can't cope with their changing perception in the public view. Here in Massachusetts, the Democratic candidate for governor of Massachusetts has proposed an extraordinarily high level of taxation on all higher ed institutions with more than $1 billion of endowment. Just to put it in context, a 1.6% tax on their endowment value is about 16 to 20% of the total amount that earns every year. I mean, it would be a very, very high tax. And it's proposed it in order to be able to say, here's how I'm going to fund the programs I want to do, and I'm a Democrat, so I'm personally not supporting him, but that's a different matter. It speaks to a set of values that the Democratic Party's embraced for one set of reasons, which is college has become unreasonably expensive, and that's what the polling data shows Democrats hate about higher ed, and that the conservatives, or I should say at least the extreme end of the Republican Party, which is a large group it turns out, have embraced for saying colleges are full of fancy people who are filling our kids with the wrong ideas. And higher ed is kidding itself if it thinks we're higher ed, we're so above all of this fray, we're the best, greatest, coolest, fabulousest thing. We're like the, maraschino cherry on top of the amazing sundae, right? That we all, and I don't mean to be super hard on higher ed, but it's just amazing. At least K-12, I would say, has like a gritty, tough, like, we're not getting done what we want to do, we're trying hard, we're battling it out, right? Higher ed, there's a certain, like, what is wrong with all these people who are mad at us? Don't they that, we're providing almost identical education to what we did 50 years ago, and only for 2 or 3 points above inflation every single year. Have you heard about our tandoori chicken and the, so that's a problem. I think another problem that I'm going to say is obvious is inequality in our society has extended to and is perpetuating what the top end can access. My wife Hillary is here with me tonight. Man, we poured it into our 5 kids, and they have done really well academically, and they go to fancy colleges and they have a life well ahead of them, and we have not worried about whether we're putting distance between us and anyone else. And they have had vastly more support in their childhoods than I got and Hillary got, even though our parents were very well educated and sent us to really fine schools. But the investment parents in our generation make in their kids is vastly higher. The middle and upper middle class are not planning to quit on it. Maybe they're driving their kids crazy with this, but they're not going to quit. So the institutions have responded. So the high-end higher ed institutions cater to a very different market than the broad market. And that should worry us all about where this is all going. And it's part, again, of the reason, the desire also to tax these high-end. I mean, when Harvard kind of whines after they announced that they've just raised $9 billion, they have, I think, a $40 or $50 billion endowment. I mean, they earn every year a meaningful percentage of the total state income. I don't blame the state for saying, that looks kind of interesting over there. And lastly, these are public and political decisions, and we live in the most cynical public environment we've ever lived in any of our lives. I think we can all agree with that. I'll skip past any MSNBC version of why you should think that. So those are really big problems, right? Growing inequality, cynical political environment, higher ed system not really up to changing at the pace we need, K-12 system really kind of beaten down by a tough 25 years. That's a lot of problems. I do want to emphasize what I think are the positives and the opportunity, and this is why I love the Woodrow Wilson Foundation and the Academy. And first off, I think the centrality of education has never been clearer to people. The reason why the upper middle class is all in on every one of their children is nobody anymore could possibly think other than that kids need every bit of education well beyond K-12 and a college degree that they can get. And that's helpful in that there's not a lot of debate about whether education is important. There's a big debate about how to do it well. Secondly, this is a generation that I think, unlike any other generation, has decided to lean in on broadening educational opportunity. And Javi, at my table, grew up in a pretty poor part of South Chicago, I think that's fair to say. We're not being inaccurate. He went to a charter school, I happen to know the founder, called Noble Academies, which is a real leader in charter success. And Javi's done really well. He went to Oberlin, he's in this program now, he's a really impressive spokesperson for this sort of thing. And all of that would not exist if there wasn't a total sea change in who's leaning into education. And whether you're, our son John, who went to Teach for America out of college, out of Harvard, or whether you're a middle-aged guy like me who, after making enough money to be able to afford to do something else, or even an old coroner like Johnson, who's been a friend of mine and a mentor since I was a kid, Bob, I'm speaking to, of course. The fact that more people than ever are leaning into what they can do to make a difference in education. The fact that the wealthiest people in our nation, the Zuckerbergs, the Gateses, the Bezoses, are picking education as where they want to make their mark and their difference is a source, in my mind, of optimism. And lastly, we have an opportunity for innovation, and we have the beginnings of an incredible culture of innovation. And again, the Woodrow Wilson Academy really speaks to that. That's an innovation almost in the model, not necessarily in the technology. A lot of people talk about innovation focus on the technology opportunities, which are also limitless. And when Javi, you were talking to me about these 3D glasses that at Natick High School people can wear and see, and they can pull an object out and look at it. When I think about what that means for the opportunity to excite students, but also when I think what it means to be able to innovate in the model of how you train teachers, we have an opportunity to really change education in a way that we haven't in a long time. Lastly, we have this ecosystem of partners, and that's why I want to call out and congratulate all of you involved in the board and all of you involved as the pioneering students. You were one of the fellows, I think, Javi, right? So were you, Alex, right? I mean, students wanting to come out of college and go into some program. Arthur's hilarious in describing, the deal was like, what, we don't have a program, we don't know if it'll work, and why don't you come join us? That was free.
That was only for you, not for them.
Oh, okay. Well, it was free in the first year, right? The fellowship year was free, right?
Yeah,
that was the So, we have this ecosystem of partners who want to work. And, when I talk to people like Eric, when I talk to people like Anna, I know that the superintendents in our state, that the higher ed leaders in our state, they need those partners. That's why they're here this evening. I think at times education can be a little bit insular, a little bit, we've got this history and tradition, but most of the time, I believe that they have the right spirit of open-mindedness of saying, who else can come and join us on this important enterprise? Yes, it's not all working perfectly. What can you do to help make it better? And is there a better example in this country, in this world, than what's going on at the Woodrow Wilson Academy? I don't know of it, so it's been an honor to be your speaker. Thank you very much.